Ruto stood on the rooftop of a building, watching the groups of students chatting and laughing down below. Deep inside, all he wanted was to put an end to this pointless game. The man who had beaten him before began yelling again, shouting that he had skipped his cleaning duties. The floor was still filthy, and when Rikuto looked in his direction, the man snapped, demanding how he dared to look at him like that. Without hesitation, he kicked Rikuto, reminding him that cleaning was his responsibility since they had taken him in after his parents had died. Nearby, a woman watched with a cruel smile. She added that it was expected, considering what kind of parents he had. Both of them were terrible adoptive parents. Later, when Rikuto opened the door to another room, a boy inside instantly blamed him. On purpose, the boy spilled soda across the floor and claimed that Rikuto was the one responsible for cleaning it up. He walked toward the already beaten down Ruto, mocking him and asking if he wasn't being generous. He kept taunting him, enjoying the moment. When Rikuto arrived at school, his desk was covered in scribbles and crude drawings of flowers. The entire class laughed behind his back, making fun of him. When the teacher entered the classroom and saw the state of Rikuto's desk, she immediately scolded him, demanding to know why he had ruined it. Not long after, Rikuto was shoved against the lockers by 3 classmates. They insulted him and demanded he hand over 2,000 yen every single day. In the end, Rikuto was so powerless, he couldn't do anything to stop them. He clenched his fists, but before he could act, one of them kicked him in the stomach, followed by another blow to his face. As the beating went on, one of the bullies sneered that he was pathetic and accused him of making fun of them. They told him that if he didn't have money, he should just ask his parents. All the while, Rikuto thought to himself that life and everyone in it were trash, but even then, he felt like he was worse than trash. When they finally stopped hitting him, his phone slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. One of the bullies noticed, and as Rikuto reached for it, the boy stomped on it. Seeing the screen crack, the bully mockingly apologized, claiming it was an accident, that his foot had just slipped. When Rikuto lowered his head in silence, the bully raised his leg again, ready to crush it further. But before he could, someone stopped him and told him to cut it out. It was Nishi, the star of the Western-style archery team and the recent winner of the national tournament. The students around them were shocked, while the girls were smitten. One of them even whispered how amazing he looked, even when stepping in to defend a loser like Rikuto. Nishi gripped the bully's shoulder tightly, making him wince in pain. The boy asked what Nishi wanted, realizing just how strong his grip was. Behind them, one of the bullies picked up a baseball bat to attack, but Nishi reacted quickly. He punched the boy before he could even swing. With the bully on the ground, Nishi muttered that seeing things like this in the streets was unpleasant. Then he told them all to leave. Grumbling, the bullies backed off and left, calling it all nonsense. Once they were gone, Nishi crouched near Rikuto and asked if he was still alive. He told him to try fighting back, that they only acted like that because he did nothing. He questioned how Rikuto could even call this living. Rikuto got up, turned his back on him, and asked what he could possibly know. Nishi was surprised to see Rikuto still standing after such a beating. He wondered if maybe the damage wasn't as bad as it looked. Amazed, he even thought that Rikuto might have dodged some of the blows at the very last second. But he dismissed the idea, muttering that it was more like something out of a movie. Back in the present, Rikuto sat on the rooftop, watching the students below as they laughed, played, and talked with each other. He sank to the ground, staring at his broken phone, a mix of sadness and frustration on his face. Looking up, he whispered that it was all over, that he was sick of living in pain. He climbed the fence that surrounded the roof and walked to the edge. Sitting there with his arms stretched out, he said he would just end this pointless game once and for all. But then, lightning suddenly began flashing across the sky. Strange glowing circles formed within the bolts, and from those circles, bars of binary code started descending toward the city. The code struck buildings, tearing them apart. All around, people's phones started making bizarre sounds that frightened their owners and caused them to drop the devices to the ground. Kurugami, confused, wondered how lightning could suddenly appear in such clear weather and what in the world was happening. Looking back at the students, he saw one of them screaming in fear as their phone flickered strangely. On the screen, binary numbers appeared, swirling together to form a bubble. The bubble grew larger until it took shape, terrifying the student as it transformed into a monstrous creature grinning menacingly. More monsters began emerging from other students' phones, dragons, goblins, and beasts of all kinds. They charged at the terrified students, chasing them without mercy. From the rooftop, Rikuto heard the cries for help and saw the chaos as students were attacked and dragged down one after another. He couldn't understand what was happening. The truth was that hordes of mysterious monsters had suddenly appeared across the world. In moments, society collapsed. It was believed that less than 1/10 of the global population survived the initial onslaught. For a while, the cause of the disaster was unknown. But eventually, a group of young people uncovered the truth. At first, the only fact they could confirm was simple. The monsters came out of people's smartphones. Nothing more. In the world that followed, survivors gave that day a name. The Day of Judgment. Standing on the railing of the school rooftop, Kurogami wondered aloud if it was really true that creatures from fantasy worlds were suddenly wiping out humanity. Smiling grimly, he said, at least he had managed to put an end to it. Below, more people screamed for help as monsters closed in. Rikuto told himself this was a death dream. Everyone who had ever mocked or insulted him was now being hunted. Grinning, he muttered that it served them right, that those who had made a fool of him could go straight to hell. But even while laughing, Rikuto admitted the dream felt disturbingly real. It wasn't just people who had bullied him, even unrelated students were being chased and devoured. Watching it unfold, he began to despair, asking why this dream wasn't ending. His life had already been a disaster, his parents were gone, the people around him were awful, even his own brother meant nothing anymore. None of it mattered. Now crying, he whispered that it wasn't right. No matter how he looked at it, it wasn't right for people to end up like this. Just then, the rooftop door creaked open. A goblin entered, carrying a severed head in its hand. The sight froze him in place. He realized at once it wasn't a dream. This was real, absolutely real. The goblin lunged toward him with a weapon, but in his panic, Rikuto fell backward off the railing onto the terrace before it could land a strike. Scrambling up, trembling, he stared at the severed head the creature carried and understood this was the end. Fear ran through him, but a strange thought surfaced. He had already been planning to end things himself. Life had been garbage, the world garbage. What difference did it make if it ended this way or another? But deep down, he realized something. He didn't want it to end like this. He didn't want to die, not like that. Snatching up an iron bar, Rikuto braced himself and blocked the monster's swing. The impact knocked him flat, but even as he staggered, he muttered that real death was worthless, miserable, and pathetic. Then he caught himself. No, that was him. That was how he had lived, but he didn't want it to end that way. Clutching the iron bar tighter, Rikuto resisted with all his strength. He shouted that he didn't want to die. Not like this. Not in a way he never chose. He kept holding off the goblin's weapon, straining against its strength. There's a state known as the zone. When focus pushes past its limits, a person reaches a perfect balance of mind and body, achieving absolute control. In that moment, Rikuto entered it. Moving instinctively, he jabbed between the goblin's legs and knocked it down. When someone is in the zone, they see the world around them with perfect clarity, reacting reflexively with the best possible decision. With the goblin sprawled on the ground, Rikuto struck it again and again with the iron bar. Then he froze. Staring at the broken monster, he was shocked at what he had just done. His stomach lurched and he vomited before screaming in despair. His life, until now, hadn't felt real, but at that moment, from the deepest part of his heart, he felt it he wanted to live. Rikuto slowly opened his eyes to the sound of someone speaking to him. A voice asked if he was okay. As he pushed himself up, he realized it was Nishi. The archer smiled faintly, relieved, and said he was thankful that Rikuto was still alive. Nishi noted that his head had been bleeding heavily, and that had worried him. Getting to his feet, Rikuto turned around. Nishi warned him not to push himself too hard. Looking past him, Rikuto noticed the city. Smoke and flames filled the skyline, entire buildings burning. Nearby, a small group of students sat on the rooftop, shaken and terrified. Among them were Teada, Tani, and Arata, the very bullies who had tormented him. Now they were trembling, confused, and full of fear. Sakura, another student, said in disbelief that everything they were seeing was impossible. Hayama, the PE teacher, wrapped an arm around her shoulder, telling her to stay close. He promised to protect her, that he would keep her safe. But despite his words, Sakura still looked uneasy. Watching quietly, the other girls whispered to each other. They remarked that the teacher's gaze seemed dirty, that he was looking at Sakura in a way that wasn't right. They said they felt sorry for her. Kurogami looked at a pile of objects stacked up nearby. Nishi explained that it was a barricade made from whatever they could gather to block the rooftop door and keep the monsters out. Everyone had run in a panic when the creatures appeared. Those who survived had made it up to the roof and used the barricade as their last line of defense. Covering his face with one hand, Kurogami muttered that there were still people left inside the school. On the other side of the barricade, desperate voices begged to be let through. Students who had managed to climb the stairs pleaded for help, banging on the barricade. But Hayama and another student insisted they couldn't open it. By the time Nishi arrived, the only thing left to hear were screams fading away beyond the barricade. Guilt weighed heavily on him. Nishi admitted he felt awful for not opening the barricade, even though he knew if he had, they all would have died too. Rikuto told him not to blame himself, that nobody wanted to face an ending like that, and that he too had given everything just to survive. Looking at the goblin's body nearby, Nishi asked if Rikuto had been the one to kill it. He was visibly shaken. The thought of even attempting something like that had never crossed his mind. He added that if he had Rikuto's kind of resolve, maybe he could have saved those students. Just then, more screams rose. The PE teacher, Hayama, called for calm and told everyone to start evaluating the situation, beginning with the fact that monsters had come out of their phones. Sakura checked hers. At first, it seemed fine, but then it powered down completely. Another student pulled theirs out, showing it was also dead. Everyone realized their phones weren't working anymore. Rikuto's was already broken, useless. The teacher groaned, saying that meant they couldn't even call for help. Kurogami began piecing things together. If the monsters had come out of phones, then everything must be connected to them. But then he thought back, no creature had emerged from his own phone. Was that because it had been shattered? Hayama dismissed the speculation, saying they weren't getting anywhere and should just focus on surviving as they were. He proposed they wait for the police or the defense forces to rescue them. He asked the group if they understood. Rikuto stared at him, incredulous, and asked if he was serious. The teacher blinked in confusion. Rikuto explained that since the creatures came from phones, it was highly likely they were everywhere in the city, not just at their school. Considering how widespread smartphones were, especially in Japan, it was more likely the entire world was in the same state. He doubted the police or the military were even capable of mobilizing. Hearing this, the students panicked. Nishi asked if maybe they should try to find a safer place instead of staying trapped there. Rikuto agreed, saying if they didn't want to end up like those outside, they had no other choice. Tita suddenly jumped up, furious, and shouted at him. He demanded to know why someone so pathetic thought he had the right to give orders. He stormed over, grabbed Rikuto by the collar, and said maybe he needed to be taught another lesson. But Rikuto didn't react. He just stared calmly at him, which made Teada uneasy. Kurogami thought to himself, how strange it was. Why was the bully spouting so much nonsense now? The other students joined in, agreeing with Teada, mocking and insulting Rikuto again. Sakura and Nishi tried to calm things down, but Teada kept pressing, asking if Rikuto was so scared he'd lost his voice. All Rikuto thought was how tiny the bully seemed, now like a chihuahua compared to the monster he had just fought. Teada leaned closer, still trying to provoke him, demanding a response. Finally, Rikuto muttered that he should stop pestering him over stupid things because it was annoying. The entire group fell silent in shock. Teada cursed and swung a punch at him. The archer tried to intervene, but Rikuto caught Teada's arm, grabbed him by the neck, and slammed him hard into the ground. The sudden move left everyone speechless. Groaning on the floor, Teada begged him to let go, whimpering in pain. Rikuto looked down at him and scoffed at how absurd it was that he had ever been afraid of someone like Teada. The bully lashed out with insults and threats, struggling, but Rikuto pressed him harder against the ground. Nishi rushed forward, grabbing Rikuto's arm and trying to pull him back. He shouted that he was going to hurt Teada seriously if he didn't stop. Looking at him, Nishi wondered if this was really the same boy who had once been bullied mercilessly. The other students murmured in disbelief. When Rikuto finally released him, Teada staggered up, still cursing and vowing revenge. Irritated, Nishi snapped at him, saying this wasn't the time for petty fights. The outburst made the bully back down. Turning to Rikuto, Nishi said it was best to just let it go. Ruto agreed. Facing the group, Rikuto told them what mattered now was figuring out what to do next instead of wasting time fighting each other. The bully sneered and hurled more insults, but the teacher interrupted, trying to get the discussion back on track. Nishi stepped forward, saying that in short, there was nothing they could do on this rooftop. They didn't know when or if rescue would come. They needed a safe location, along with food and water. Kurogami interrupted, adding that weapons would be necessary too. Sakura asked if such a safe place even existed. The archer admitted that was the real problem. Ruto said they first needed to check the inside of the building. They couldn't plan anything until they knew whether moving was even possible. Stego immediately objected, saying it was far too dangerous, there could be more monsters waiting. They should just stay put. The teacher agreed, saying they should at least confirm what was happening in the hallways. The students pushed back, insisting nobody wanted to walk into danger. Finally, the teacher ordered Kurogane and Teada to go check. Teada froze, horrified, and protested. He snapped that the teacher should set an example and go himself, but Hayama refused, saying his duty was to stay and protect the group. The girls sided with the teacher, saying that if the boys were men, they should step up. Red with embarrassment, Teada shouted at them. Ruto quietly picked up the iron bar he had used earlier and walked toward the barricade. Teada panicked, asking if he was serious. Ruto turned to him and asked back was he. The longer they stayed there, the worse things would get. They would either starve or eventually get torn apart by monsters. Either way, the rooftop would be their end. He said he didn't want that. If that was the case, their only option was to move. Hearing his words, Nishi was encouraged. He grabbed his bow and declared that Rikuto was right. He would go too, there might be other survivors out there. Hayama shouted at them, saying that if anything happened to Nishi, it would be Rikuto's fault. The girls screamed, begging Nishi not to go. But Rikuto snapped at the teacher, calling him a hypocrite. Kurogami added that he was glad Nishi was joining them. He smirked, saying the Chihuahua clearly wasn't up for it anyway. Tiada blinked in confusion at the nickname. Watching Tiada tremble, Rikuto realized he really was just like a Chihuahua. Nishi asked if he was sure about going, admitting honestly that it would be dangerous and the chance of being attacked was high. Still smiling, Nishi said he wasn't ready to die, he had a reason to live. In his mind, he pictured a girl by a window. Hearing that, Rikuto told him he seemed reliable. Nishi laughed and said maybe he was just as crazy as Rikuto. Awkwardly, he admitted he didn't even know Rikuto's name yet. They exchanged names, and through light jokes, they managed to push through the barricade together and step inside. Rikuto and Nishi moved cautiously through the corridor. Bodies lay scattered everywhere, the aftermath of the chaos. Nishi muttered that the scene felt like a nightmare. Rikuto shook his head and replied it wasn't a dream, this was reality. Still uneasy, Nishi said he understood, but couldn't help noticing how strange it was. Where were all the monsters? He quickly added he wasn't complaining, but the silence felt wrong. Rikuto speculated that maybe the creatures had already left the school for the city. Nishi asked why that would be. Rikuto explained that the school had been closed off, and there weren't many people left inside. The monsters probably went elsewhere, searching for more prey. Nishi nodded reluctantly. He admitted the reasoning made sense, though it was horrible to think about. As they continued down the hallway, Nishi suddenly stopped. He raised a hand, signaling Rikuto to stay quiet. A sound slapping footsteps echoed faintly from a distant corridor. Carefully, they crept closer to the edge of the hallway and peered around. A goblin stood in the middle of the corridor. The two exchanged a look. If it was alone, they could take it down. Nishi readied his bow, adjusting his stance and equipment. He steadied his breathing, keeping his distance to line up a clear shot. Taking his time, he pulled back the string and released. The arrow struck the goblin from behind, piercing into its chest. But the creature didn't go down. Its resilience shocked them, it turned, spotted Nishi, and let out a piercing scream. Before Nishi could ready another arrow, the goblin rushed toward him with frightening speed. Kurogami leapt forward, intercepting. He swung the iron pipe with all his strength, slamming it directly into the goblin's head and sending it sprawling. The monster staggered, trying to get back up, but Rikuto closed in quickly and struck it repeatedly until it collapsed. Breathing hard, Nishi walked over. He admitted that his friend was brutal, but effective. Rikuto asked if there were any other monsters nearby. Nishi scanned the surroundings, shook his head, and said they were clear. Rikuto nodded in agreement, but in his mind, he couldn't shake the thought there were creatures out there that humans had no chance against. Images of the massive dragons he had glimpsed earlier replayed in his mind. Curious, Nishi asked what he meant. He said that looking at the goblins, they seemed just like something out of a video game. He even pointed out how this one looked exactly like a goblin. Kurogami agreed. He too felt like he had seen these monsters somewhere before. As they talked, Nishi's hands trembled slightly. The reality sank in. If that goblin had managed to hit him earlier, he would have been killed for real. Clenching his fist, he admitted that now, for the first time, they were truly risking their lives. Rikuto agreed, pointing out that unlike games, they had no cheats, no magic, no second chances. They were just ordinary humans. Nishi turned to him and said he clearly wasn't a beginner. He asked if Rikuto had been trained in weapons or learned from a mentor. But Rikuto's mind drifted. He remembered his brother, the one he had once defeated in a fight, and quietly replied that he never had any training. Nishi frowned, asking then why he had allowed himself to be bullied, despite having such skills. Kurogami admitted he didn't really know. The two pressed on. Soon, they found a room on fire, bodies scattered across the floor. The sight was grim, but they kept moving. Nishi commented that the silence was unnerving. It seemed the goblin they had fought was the only monster on the 6th floor. Rikuto explained that most of the rooms here were for training, so not many people had been around. But he warned there could be more monsters on the lower floors. They reached the stairwell. Before heading down, Rikuto stopped. He said they needed to make their goals clear. Kurogami stated that the purpose was to assess the situation. Nishi added that they had to figure out how many people were still in the school and what escape routes were possible. They needed information before making their next move. Rikuto agreed. He said the most important thing was to make it back alive with that information. If danger came, anyone had the right to leave the others behind to survive. Trying to lighten the mood, he joked that nobody should hold grudges in an emergency like this. Nishi laughed and teased him for trying to sound tough. Before Rikuto could respond, they both froze. A faint cry for help drifted up from the floor below. Rikuto hesitated only for a moment before rushing downstairs. Nishi sighed, watching him go. He muttered that he knew exactly what kind of person Rikuto was. Someone who could never abandon others. On the floor below, a larger goblin wielding an iron club stalked the halls. Its appearance was more intimidating horns jutting from its head. Inside a small cabinet, Tachibana Cotton hid, trembling. Through a crack, she could see the horror unfolding. The goblins were tormenting her classmates, stripping them, ignoring their cries for mercy. One girl begged for it to stop, but the monster went into a frenzy, attacking her viciously. Tachibana shut her eyes, covering her ears, spiraling into panic. She whispered apologies to herself for always running away, for never doing anything. In her memories, she saw Rikuto being beaten by the bullies. She had watched, frozen, thinking she should step in, but never doing it. She had barely managed to whisper for them to stop before the blonde-haired bully kicked Rikuto in the face. She had flinched when another boy placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her away, saying they should just go to class. She let herself be dragged away while Rikuto lay on the floor. Back in the cabinet, she opened her eyes again. She must have fainted from the stress, because she had lost track of time. Her heart pounded. Where were her classmates now? How long had she been hiding? Panicking, she fumbled to pull her phone from her pocket, but her hands shook so badly she dropped it. The device clattered loudly on the floor. The goblins stirred, their noises louder for a moment, then silence. Her breath caught in her throat. Had they heard? The cabinet doors suddenly burst open. 2 goblins glared down at her. Her eyes widened in horror. All around, she could see the bodies of her classmates, including her friend Misaki. The goblin yanked her by the hair and dragged her out, beginning to tear at her clothes as she screamed for help. Then, another monster appeared. With a single brutal blow, it crushed the goblin holding her. The other goblins immediately turned on it, but this new creature swatted them aside with ease, tearing them apart. Tachibana, overwhelmed, screamed at the top of her lungs for anyone to help her. Far off, Rikuto and Nishi heard her cries and sprinted toward the sound. Meanwhile, the new monster grabbed Tachibana and dragged her down the corridor, pulling along the broken bodies of goblins it had killed. Tachibana sobbed, begging it to let her go, but the monster slammed her into a wall, knocking her unconscious. Hiding at a distance, Rikuto and Nishi watched. Nishi gripped his bow nervously. He asked if his arrows would even work on something like that. Rikuto shook his head. He said his instincts told him this creature was different. Nishi demanded to know what it was. Rikuto explained that the reason there had been so few monsters earlier was because of this. The goblins were being hunted. This monster was their predator. It was stronger, more territorial, higher up the food chain. Alone, they stood no chance. Nishi's gaze flicked back to Tachibana. His chest tightened. To his shock, Rikuto suddenly stood and began moving toward the creature. Nishi hissed at him, asking if he was crazy. Did he want to die? Rikuto answered calmly. He said Tachibana was still alive, and he was going to save her. Nishi grabbed his arm, demanding to know why. Was it just for self-satisfaction? Some kind of empty justice? He shouted that Rikuto was risking his life without thinking. Rikuto looked him in the eye and said that earlier, Nishi had asked him if he felt alive. Facing death had forced him to admit something he truly wanted to live. And because of that, he would never let himself fall again. That was why he was going to save her. Nishi shook his head, calling him insane. He asked if dying pointlessly was really what Rikuto thought living meant. Rikuto replied firmly, it didn't matter if Nishi joined him or not. This was his choice alone. In his memory, he heard his brother's voice. Serrano's cruel words echoed, that he had no money, no family, no one at his side, that he was as good as dead. But Rikuto whispered back that he would never be someone dead again, even if it destroyed him. Nishi's hand tightened on his shoulder. Quietly, he said he had a sister not related by blood who went to another school. He confessed he couldn't stand the thought of her being left alone. He continued, saying if his sister were in danger like Tachibana was, he couldn't live with himself if he ran away. That was why he was going to help Rikuto fight. Together, they would save her. Rikuto blinked at him, then smirked. He said the two of them were about to do something incredibly stupid for selfish reasons. He asked if Nishi was okay with that. Nishi laughed, embarrassed. He admitted there must be something wrong with his head too. He added quietly that a man had to have his pride. The two nodded in agreement. Then they began planning. Nishi asked how Rikuto intended to handle it. Charging straight in would be suicide. Rikuto replied that he had an idea based on how their earlier fights had gone. The plan began to take shape. Tachibana woke up tied to a thick wooden beam. Around her, goblin corpses were strung up like skewers, roasting over flames set by the monster. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. The massive creature loomed nearby, tearing into the roasted goblins as it ate. Suddenly, its head turned, its eyes focused on her. Realizing she was awake, Tachibana froze. Terror gripped her, and she let out a piercing scream. That was the signal. Rikuto and Nishi sprang into action, their plan set into motion. As they ran, Nishi shouted, that after hearing Rikuto's crazy idea, he was convinced his friend had completely lost his mind. Tachibana, meanwhile, was overwhelmed with despair. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered that she didn't want to die. She thought she would be burned alive, eaten by the monster like the goblins before her. The creature lumbered closer, lifting the wooden beam she was tied to. It carried her toward the fire, ignoring her frantic begging. Just as it drew near the flames, a voice rang out from the doorway. It was Rikuto. He shouted at her to close her eyes. The monster dropped the beam, turned, and gripped its heavy iron club. Snarling, it advanced on him. Rikuto yanked the pin from a fire extinguisher and sprayed a cloud of white foam into its face. The monster roared in anger, temporarily blinded. Taking advantage of the distraction, Rikuto rushed to Tachibana's side and began working at the ropes. She stared at him in disbelief and whispered his name. Without looking at her, Rikuto said flatly that he didn't know her, he was just helping. Inside, Tachibana thought to herself that it was obvious he didn't remember her. She wondered bitterly why he would. Realizing the ropes weren't cutting, Rikuto switched to plan B. He banged the pipe hard against the floor, sending a signal. From his hidden position, Nishi understood immediately. He grimaced at the sheer madness of the plan, but readied himself anyway. Moving closer, he muttered that he wasn't confident, but he would try his best. He asked Rikuto not to blame him if he missed. The monster wiped its eyes clear and roared again. It spotted Rikuto kneeling by Tachibana. Its fury exploded. With a deafening roar, the monster's power shattered every window in the hallway. Rikuto raised the iron pipe. The beast swung its massive club down at him. Rikuto analyzed its movements carefully. He knew one mistake would end it all. Using a kendo technique called Kiriyato-hi, he parried the strike, redirecting it just enough to avoid being crushed. His arms trembled under the force, but he managed to hold on. Relief surged through him. His muscle memory hadn't betrayed him after all these years. For a moment, time froze. A boy with nothing but a metal pipe, standing against a towering demon. The monster pressed forward, slamming strike after strike. Rikuto struggled, but he adjusted, redirecting each attack instead of meeting them head-on. He countered with sharp blows to its feet, exploiting any opening he could. The narration explained this was a modern kendo technique. Rather than opposing power, with power, one shifts the attack vector, reducing the impact. Flashes of his childhood came back. He saw his father teaching him those skills. Rikuto whispered his thanks in his heart. Nearby, Tachibana watched wide-eyed. She thought his fighting was unbelievable. Rikuto reminded himself over and over these were just monsters, clumsy with brute force, no real technique. But the demon wasn't slowing down. Its swings were savage, relentless. Rikuto grit his teeth and endured, then struck at its wrist, forcing it to recoil. He thought bitterly that the monster relied only on strength. It didn't even know how to wield its weapon properly. Still, every impact rattled his body. His arms screamed with fatigue. His lungs burned. He knew he couldn't last much longer. The demon roared and swung its club again, wide and heavy. Rikuto ducked and countered, landing a solid strike to its head. The monster staggered, letting out a pained cry. From where she was tied, Tachibana gasped. She thought it was incredible how he managed to keep standing against such an opponent. But Rikuto felt his strength slipping. Even though he was deflecting the blows, each one still shook through him. He could feel himself reaching his limit. He backed off, moving defensively, buying himself time. He knew head-on attacks weren't working. If he wanted to win, he needed a single, decisive strike. He called out to the monster, drawing its attention again. Smoke puffed from its ears as it let out another terrifying growl. Then, it shifted its gaze to Tachibana. It grabbed the wooden beam she was tied to and swung it as a weapon, the girl screaming as it tried to crush Rikuto with her body. Outside, the sounds of destruction echoed, walls cracking, objects shattering from the sheer force of the fight. Rikuto ran desperately, dodging the attacks as the monster swung Tachibana's bound body at him. He managed to stay a step ahead, but Tachibana, swinging helplessly, sobbed as she felt abandoned. Her vision blurred with tears. She remembered herself as a child cornered, bullied, crying. Two boys had teased and tormented her mercilessly. But then, a younger Rikuto had appeared. He had stepped forward and demanded to know why they were bullying her. Back in the present, Tachibana cried harder. She realized he had always been like this, throwing himself into danger to protect someone else. She wept, tied to the beam, as the battle raged. At the same time, another boy watching from a distance saw Rikuto struggling. He thought to himself that the guy was amazing for holding out this long, but he was clearly at his limit. The boy hurried forward, his expression darkening. He whispered that this was where he had to end it without failure. Rikuto continued luring the monster, staying just far enough ahead. He swung his iron bar with everything left in him, but his grip weakened. The monster's club smashed into him. The impact launched Rikuto across the hall, his body crashing hard against the floor. He lay there, bloodied and unable to move. Tachibana screamed his name. From nearby, the boy with the bow, Nishi, watched in alarm. His friend's life hung by a thread. Nishi remembered Rikuto's instructions. There would be one chance, one shot. It had to be perfect. He studied the monster, trembling. The angle wasn't right. The distance wasn't ideal. His heart raced. If he waited too long, it would be over. Sweat ran down his face. He begged silently for the beast to move closer, to give him a clear shot. But as he hesitated, Rikuto's voice suddenly rang out. Even injured, lying on the ground, he shouted for Nishi not to shoot yet. Confused, Nishi froze. Rikuto, coughing up blood, yelled that he needed the monster to be just a few meters closer. He told Nishi to wait. Then, groaning in pain, Rikuto pushed himself back up. Face to face with the monster again, he staggered, but he stood. Nishi watched in awe and disbelief. Tachibana cried out desperately, tied to the beam. The monster growled and advanced. Rikuto's knees buckled. He nearly collapsed, but forced himself upright again. His iron bar shook in his hands. The demon roared, the sound shaking the entire hall. Nishi tensed, waiting. Tachibana screamed at Rikuto to run, saying the monster would kill him. But he told her not to worry about him. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She begged to know why he would risk his life for her. She cried that she didn't deserve it. She confessed she had abandoned him before, that she didn't deserve to be saved. In her memory, she saw it clearly. Rikuto being beaten while she stood aside. She had almost stepped forward, but then someone had touched her shoulder and pulled her back. Stego had told her not to get involved, that she should just listen to him, and she had obeyed. Now, watching Rikuto risk everything, the guilt consumed her. If you enjoyed the story so far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Yume Recap, and stay tuned for the next video.